Yo, 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 what's good, everybody? Hope everybody is doing well. Welcome to Allegheny West Conference Camp Meeting 2021. This is the Young Adult Camp Meeting, and of course, our theme is right there on the screen Homecoming. We're not next, we're now. I'm Pastor John Coaxum, based here in Columbus, Ohio. And listen, I am flanked by some of the best minds in the church. See, they're smiling right now because they didn't know I was going to say that, but it's true. It's true. It's true. The gurus themselves, especially when it comes to this pandemic. Dr. James Doggette Sr., one of my professors at Oakwood, responsible for a lot of what I am today and who I am in ministry. He has definitely inspired me, as well as my boy, Pastor James Doggette Jr. We've done ministry together. Remember that time in Georgia, man? We did Bible work together.
Absolutely.
I remember those days. That was awesome. And as well, man, shout out to that shirt, man. That is awesome. The church has left the building. I love it. I love it. And it's right in line with what we're going to talk about today. So check this out, guys. When we think about the church and we think about last year, 2020, some people are saying, you know what? Church life is forever going to be split between before COVID and after COVID, before the pandemic and after the pandemic. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of pastors, a lot of ministry leaders have had to pivot on a dime, man, to try to figure out, how am I going to keep my church alive? How am I going to keep ministry going during this season where, nobody could have really foreseen this? But you two have done an awesome job at pivoting, especially you, Pastor James Doggett Jr., with your quarantine revival. We'll let you talk about that in just a moment. But I guess, well, yeah, let's start there. I'll start with you, Pastor Doggett. Tell me about the quarantine revival. How did it come about, and why did you start doing it?
So, first of all, let me say that I'm grateful to be here with all of you amazing people. This conference is a special conference, and Pastor Coaxum, I appreciate the invitation, the likes of which I admire, the heights to which I aspire. We love you, man, and we appreciate your leadership. You are the man. So, as it relates to the quarantine revival, last year, I just remember shifting into the pandemic. There was a level of fear and anxiety, and I remember my wife coming to me and pointing out there was this DJ called DJ Nice, this guy who blew up overnight. He was doing his thing, his DJ thing, in his house or in his apartment or wherever he was living. And he was doing it live on Instagram. And I'll never forget, some people like the likes of Michelle Obama and folk like that were jumping in and participating. It spoke to me in clear tones that people, although they were quarantining, separated, they were hungry for something. And he was meeting a need there. And I felt that we can meet the need with the gospel, encouraging, inspiring, and connecting people with one another in the virtual space. So call some of my closest friends. Of course, my father was one of the initial preachers in the first quarantine revival. And we just pulled people together and we did our thing. We shared the good news. We pulled folk from all over the world together in one space to not just hear a good message, but this group over the last year gave away close to $60,000 to individuals who were suffering in financial crisis. So it was just an opportunity for people to pool their resources to help folk who were in need. It was fun, and doing it with people who, again, were excited and lit with the Holy Ghost and anointed with power. It was life changing for me, and I heard a lot of testimonies that it was impactful in the lives of those who are around the world as well.
That's awesome, man. Awesome. And to you, Dr. Doggett, as well. We can see you're doing outdoor services down there in Florida. My associate, Pastor Max Gomez, was down there, raved about everything that you're doing, enjoyed himself as well. Talk to us just a little bit about what you're doing. How's that been for you?
Yeah, I want to say too, just like JD did, man. Hey, thank you for remembering us. You did say this is the young adult camp meeting, and you have me on. Did you make a mistake?
No, no mistake, Doc. No mistake.
Hey, man, I love hanging out with the young folks. Hey, listen, this COVID season for me, obviously, people getting sick and folks dying, that's the downside of it. But the upside of it is a much needed deconstruction of what church was happened rapidly. And it was
Mm-hmm.
unavoidable. We didn't have to debate whether or not we needed to change. Obviously, we needed to change. But the way
Mm-hmm.
that thing went down, we had to change. And that season has been a great season, actually, for me. And I'm not all that excited about going back to what we used to do that really wasn't
Oh
working
my.
very well. This has been an
Mm-hmm.
opportunity to awaken creativity. JD just talked about the quarantine revival, which is epic, and is a new way
Absolutely.
to do something that we've been commissioned to do, and that's spread the gospel. I love a lot of the changes I've seen. This has been a season of creativity. It's been a deconstruction of stuff that was not working, and now we have to be very wise and spiritual in the reconstruction of things as we're now starting to go back into our buildings, etc. Those buildings have to be a little bit different, used a little bit differently. Internet has to be used a little
Mm-hmm.
bit differently. There are
Uh-huh.
ways and means that we've not yet
Mm-hmm.
discovered that have to be discovered. This is a season of creativity. If I might just say this, the very first
Mm-hmm.
attribute of God mentioned in Genesis 1:1, in
Oh,
the beginning, God created. And if we're going to be
My
godly, we
Lord.
got to get creative right now, not with the
Oh
gospel,
mercy.
but with how we're presenting it. The old ways are gone. The new foundation
Mm-hmm.
has been laid. Let's not cry
Mm-hmm.
like the old men in the book of
Mm-hmm.
Ezra. Let's go ahead and celebrate, because the construction of this new thing is going to be more glorious than what we had before,
whew.
according to the Bible and the word of the Lord. And I do feel like preaching,
According to the
and I
word.
will
Come
back
on
up.
down. Come
Let me hit
on down.
reverse.
The
Come
word is
on.
coming strong already. Listen. All right, so that's a perfect segue, right? Because Pastor Doggett, you are enjoying the quarantine revival. I have enjoyed it. I mean, thousands of people, literally around the world, are enjoying what you're doing. People are watching you down there in Florida as well, Dr. Doggett. Now, listen, we know about Florida. Your governor, for the longest time,
Yeah.
has. I don't want to get into politics, but maybe hasn't fed into the pandemic as much. I mean, I'm walking around now, and people are now walking around with no masks. It's becoming more and more common, and more conferences, more churches are beginning to open up. So I want your real opinion as you're talking to the young adults today, because I'm not going to lie. I've kind of enjoyed my time in this pandemic in 2020, getting creative and being innovative, and even just, I don't know, being home with my family and worshiping, right? But talk to me a
Right.
little bit. How do you feel about going back into the church? Are you going back this year, or how do you feel about that whole process?
JD, you want me to jump in first here?
Jump in
Our
first, Doc.
conference. Yes, sir. Okay, our conference has given us clearance to start going back into our buildings around
Mm-hmm.
July 3. And there are a lot of
Okay.
people who are just anxious. In fact, they're probably parked outside of the building right now, waiting for the opportunity to go back in their suits
Mm-hmm.
and their nice clothes to do what they used to do. I will suggest this to you, though. We don't need to do what we used to do. It was not working. A whole generation walked out of our church, and there is the graying of Adventism as a result of that. And we don't need to go back to ways and means that did not work. And so I can tell you this. You mentioned that we're doing a drive-in worship service. We bought a huge screen we put on the outside of our building. And by the way, your associate came and tore that place up. He tore the parking lot
Oh, I know
up.
it. I
Max
believe it.
is a preacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he's learning from a
Mm-hmm.
preacher, his senior pastor. But we have a low frequency FM station, and people love. They bring their dogs. They come dressed casually. They're in their cars, and they get good worship. If it gets real good, they'll stick their heads up through the sunroof or step outside of their cars and get with it. But the bottom line is, when we go back in, for those who love the old ways, who still want to worship in Solomon's old temple, they can go back in and have fun. But we're going to still do the drive-in worship experience. So you'll have your
Mercy.
choice. You can do this or that. And there is a splitting of the
Wow.
generations right now, to be quite honest. A younger
Mm-hmm.
generation has completely walked out of the building, not coming back in. And then there's an
Mm-hmm.
older generation yearning for the good old days. I say, let the old people have the good old days. Let them go on back in and do what they did. But let's continue to find ways and means to reach those who aren't going to get it that way. So the season of creativity has not ended. We got to
Mm-hmm.
still be spiritual entrepreneurs right now.
Right.
And that's what's required. So going
That's
back
awesome,
in,
bro.
bro, it won't be like it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And just before you jump in, Pastor Doggett, I think what you're advocating for options, right? You're advocating for options. You
Yes.
just said you're not necessarily going to throw things away. But listen, if this is working, we want to continue this to keep this demographic, which is mostly the young adults and young people, coming to the church. If they like outdoor services, why not, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and
Go-
JD probably will hit this, but I have learned this lesson. You can't require old people to keep making changes.
Mm,
Honestly, they've kind of sat down where they are, and let's facilitate them. But let's not refuse to facilitate those who aren't in that chapter. Their chapter is
right.
not the last chapter. There are more chapters to be
Yeah.
written. So let's keep on writing.
Sure.
Let's keep on writing. So this and that can be done at the same time.
Absolutely. Sounds good. Yeah, Doc, talk to us.
Well, I'm just kind of following what Pops just mentioned, Dr. Doggett just mentioned. The fact of the matter is, a lot of people want to diagnose this as a medical issue. The idea that we have a declining percentage of people who are actually connected with church. So there is an image here that shows us that when it comes to membership, when it comes to affiliation to a church, there are a lot of people who are still religiously affiliated with some religious
Hmm.
system. But when it comes to if you go to the other slide, when it comes to actually being connected to a local church, that number has declined severely over the years. It's now below 50%. And with this in
Mm,
mind, the idea here is that I really want to espouse that the majority of attendees may no longer be in the room, and we have to be
mm,
okay with that. And when it
mhm.
comes to content, one of the things I've learned, if I can just go in that direction, just assuming that we are going to continue, which I think should happen, continue to prioritize our online offerings, because a lot of people who, just like was just mentioned by Dr. Doggett and you, Pastor Coaxum, we've been enjoying this season, where we're not in the walls of the church all the time. The idea that the church
Mhm.
has left the building. Most churches are reporting that 10 to 40% of the prior church attendance figures have shown back up. Only 10 to 40%. So most people are not
Wow.
coming back to church, like Dr. Doggett just mentioned. And if we're then going to prioritize our online offerings, I want to suggest to us that our digital content should not be prioritizing consumption, but connection. So
Mm,
the idea is that we shift our perspective from from focusing on gathering in a specific location at a specific hour to facilitating connection, which might take place in off facility sites like a home or in a park or other places like that. The idea that we have to now shift, I'm talking now about praxis. Some of the things that we need to be doing is that we prioritize connection and community and not just content. Let me explain why this is something I've learned since we started
mhm.
the quarantine revival. We had a lot, thousands of people tuning in, right, every night. We had some of the best speakers. I couldn't get you, Pastor Coaxum, because you were going through a little situation there, so I guess we didn't get all the best speakers, but a lot of really great, powerful, amazing anointed
Mm,
preachers. The content was there, but I've noticed since we started the quarantine revival, it started to decline. And it's a reality that we have to admit that most churches are experiencing. We had great attendance initially, but now the online attendance is starting to decline. So the question then becomes, are people just screened out? Well, I would suggest that, if people are screened out, you test that theory with TikTok and Instagram, because, people aren't
mm,
screened. It's
mm,
not, the idea is that, look, if I want to hear a sermon, I'll hear it whenever I want for free. So I'm not going to attend at a specific time. We have to prioritize connection. Again, facilitating the community aspect of what it is that we're producing
mhm.
and not just the content for consumption. So we have to
Right.
prioritize that. That's huge for me, which is one of the reasons why I think what Dad is doing there at Patmos or the Well is so critically important, because they're utilizing their facility not merely for the gathering of a worship experience one day out of the week, but they are presenting, and you can talk more in detail about this, Doc. They're presenting an opportunity here where life can be experienced there and real connection can happen. And that, I think, is what needs to become our priority, not just trying to get the best preacher, the best speaker, the best singer. The content is not going to keep you. I'm sorry. I've tried it. I pulled, it was great at the beginning, but that's not long as it relates to longevity and long-term success. You've got to start facilitating. And we weren't, I'll say this, and then I'll pass the mic. We were not threatened by this when we were talking about the concept of small groups. Small groups is very, that's what I'm talking about. The idea where we facilitate the execution of the mission of the church in a different space other than a building owned by the church. It can still happen. And if, I'll say this and pass the mic, if in 2021, coming to Christ means coming to a church at a specific time, at a specific place, then we need to change our strategy. That is a strategy that will not work. We have to shift our focus. I'm tossing the mic back to you now.
Right. Okay, cool. No, that was a good word, man. I received that. So listen, you touched on one of the areas that I want to get into real quickly. There's 4 areas for today's conversation. We'll just jump in and out real quick. All right. Number 1 is culture, right? Culture, leadership. We got facilities and then ministry. But let's stay with culture just for one more second. And you talked about connecting together. And the reason I have you two here, and Adventists won't like this, but I want you guys to look into your crystal ball. Okay. Look into your crystal ball, be some clairvoyance right now and talk to us just a little bit more about how things are going to change and what we're possibly going to see, after this pandemic is over as it begins to wane. And you've already talked about the connection piece. Dr. Doggette, it looked like you were about to jump in for a moment. Did you want to talk more just about culture, about how COVID has changed our local community, our local congregation? I mean, are we still going to have the welcome, where we all get up and we hugging each other and all that kind of stuff? I mean, somebody asked me that the other day. I don't know. I mean, what do you think is going to happen in terms of us being in the same space together?
I think you're muted, Doc.
Yep.
Okay, all the prognostications, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, all the prognostications that I've heard from people who are supposed to know about these things are very clear that the numbers are going to be greatly reduced. Those who have already started going back in, and JD mentioned this, I mean, you're at about 37%, 36% of what you used to have. But you still can have them if you'll be a little bit more sophisticated with your online presence. I would suggest that we're going to have to be a little bit more timely with our services because the bulk of people are going to receive them online and they will leave you after a while if you don't get right to the point. So that's one of the cultural shifts. Instead of using the internet to get people into your building, use your building to drive people to the internet because that's where they're going to get the bulk of their religious programming. So we have to have community setups in our buildings where fellowship happens, where life is lived. And then they can go to the internet at their convenience for some of the preaching. Preaching's going to change. That's the last thing I'll tell you. Preaching has to change. Yeah. The idea of us standing behind a desk, screaming and hollering, spitting at folks on the front rows and thinking they're going to buy it because we're loud and banging the desk, et cetera. That's not how people receive data now. There's an old generation that appreciates that the art form of homiletics. The newer generation does not. The bulk of those who are now the people we've got to reach, the unchurched, so to speak, aren't going to get it that way with us screaming and hollering and throwing out some rhymes and all that. I would suggest that one of the cultural shifts that is needed and will happen is we're going to go back to a model that's a little bit more like what Jesus did when he had 3.5 years to flip the world upside down and win it. What he did was he had conversations and discussions mostly in small groups. And then they went out and had conversations and discussions in their small groups, and it spread that way. And I think we're going to have to go back to that model. For old people, let's go ahead and spit and scream and all that and bang on the desk, and they're good with it. They're good with it. Yeah. But the younger generation ain't getting it that way. That's a cultural shift. We're going to have to be timely. That means everything's going to have to be in nice snippets, and we're going to have to TikTok it a little bit. We're going to have to Instagram it a little bit. We're going to have to put it in nice little packages. And we're also going to have to stop screaming at folks. And we're going to have to allow feedback and discussion in smaller groups, informally spreading the gospel.
That's good.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And I think, too, a lot of pastors might be, maybe not a lot, but a few may be uncomfortable, right, with having the conversation after the sermon. We do that now at my church, but I kind of like it. I mean, you get to see people reflecting on what you said and connecting the dots between what you said. I mean, how many times have I stood at the door and somebody said something to me, Pastor, what you said here was great. I love it when you said this. And I never actually said that at all. Like they just interpreted something else. Like I never said that, right? So I think the dialogue could be good. But just let me stay here for 1 second, just on culture. Real quick answer from you both. Maybe, and you kind of touched on this, Dr. Doggett, the pomp and circumstance, right, of church a little bit. You know, the walking in, I don't know, man, maybe even the suits and the ties. Do you see that going away where people, we have to make people feel more comfortable dressing down and saying, listen, you don't have to dress up anymore. What do you guys think, real quick?
Well, if I could just jump in real quick, Doc,
Yep.
and I want you to, affirm or, go in a different direction if you want to. But one of the things that I think is leading to this, disconnecting from what we see, especially in our church and our denomination, is that there's now an understanding that a lot of what we do is cultural and not biblical as it relates to how we're dressing, as it relates to what we do. There's a book, and Dad put me on this. It's called Pagan Christianity. And the idea is that a lot of people are becoming aware that you just want me to be a cultural Adventist, not a real Christian. And the idea is that we're getting away from this cultic responsibility where we feel the need to operate in this specific way in order to feel saved. That is no longer working because there is now a new awakening to this idea that, wait a second, you're telling me I don't have to be a vegetarian to be saved? Like those things that we like to push as being priority within our denomination are no longer going to cut it. Because there's now an awakeness. Y'all know everybody's woke nowadays. There's a level of understanding now that what you guys are pushing as it relates to specific types of music that are holier than others and different stuff that we like to make moral issues, when we recognize that they're not, it's very difficult to get people engaged when we see so much being propped up on moral footing when it has nothing to do with Bible and everything to do with culture. So a lot of it has to change because, again, you're no longer going to get away with just saying stuff because we're going to fact check you. And we already understand that a lot of what you espoused over the decades didn't lead to transformation in the lives of people who came before me. So why would I embrace it? Because you think it's holier. And I know that based on the Bible, it's not even referenced in Scripture.
Wow. That's a word. Dr. Doggett.
No, I just want to stamp that. That has my stamp of approval. I totally agree with that. Yeah, we're going to have to be much more biblical and less cultural.
Absolutely.
If we're going to be
all right, so guys,
no,
I totally agree. Totally agree. Let's go. Let's jump into leadership real quick. Leadership. Do any new leadership roles maybe emerge as a result of, when we talk about new ministry after the pandemic, right? Do any new ministry roles rise to the surface as, you know what? If you can get it, you should have this. Maybe an outreach pastor, a community pastor, online pastor, more volunteers. What do you think is needed in terms of leadership beyond the pastor going forward into this season after the pandemic?
Dr. Doggett?
No. JD, you're working on a PhD in leadership, man. You take this ball and run with it, if you will. But yeah, there are absolutely different roles that are going to have to rise up. And I will just say this and then toss the ball to JD. We're not going to be able to get the work done with just volunteers anymore, or just a pastor and an associate pastor. If we're going to be players in the game, and I mean, if we're going to get a share of the market, an opportunity to really communicate with a good share of the market, we're going to have to get off of our this view that is not spiritual if you're paying for it, and go back to the Bible, where in fact those who worked in the temple, and the temple was open 24/7, were paid to make it happen. And in our churches, we're going to have to start paying staff, not just a visionary pastor. That's our job, to cast vision, but then we have to have people who help to execute the vision through training and through supervising the volunteers. And it's going to take a number of those in our churches to make it happen, especially since we're moving out of the building and we're getting out into the community. You mentioned one, and that is someone who handles the internet, We're going to have to be professional with that. We're going to need to pay somebody to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that our internet presence isn't somebody holding up a phone, trying to film stuff as they shake their hands shake.
Yeah.
That's
Mm-hmm.
worse than not having an internet presence at all. That's all I'm saying. And I'll let it go and pass it to JD. But we're going to have to embrace the idea of having paid staff, especially since it's biblical.
Right, right.
Amen.
Right. Well, I'll jump in, and he just mentioned a few of them. Even when it comes to the internet pastor, you still need responsibilities that you can give and delegate to individuals in that space that go beyond just manning the stream. You need people like you need virtual ushers, you need virtual greeters, you need to consider the virtual atmosphere just as you would consider the physical presence of those attendees who come to your church. You have to distribute those responsibilities in the virtual space as well. And also, I'll say this. I know you asked for us to look at the crystal ball. One of the things I know for sure is that a lot of the practices that will be mainstay in the next 5 years are being birthed right now. So the idea that we should be bold in our experimentation and we should go out there without hesitation to try things. One of the things I do know is that there's going to be an emerging of micro churches, distributed churches. The idea of the off-site gathering is so critically important. So what does that mean? You need to now be delegating responsibilities to people who can facilitate those gatherings and who can, here it is, again, maintain connection. So although they are gathering in a different facility at home or in another location, they should still be able to feel a part of and be equipped to fulfill the mission. So the idea is not filling up a building. The idea is helping people fulfill the mission. And if your mission, again, has been reduced to the filling up of a small room with attendees, then your vision is way too small. So when it comes to equipping and facilitating the community initiatives, the connection between members, there's so much in terms of leadership that can be provided in helping that to become a success in our local congregations.
Let me ask a question, rhetorical question. We talk about 7-day a week ministry, and of course, again, the temple was open 7 days a week. If you want to bring in your sacrifice, you didn't have to wait till Sabbath to do it.
Right.
You could bring it on in because there are folks working in shifts over in the temple. If we're going to have 7-day a week ministries, how's that going to happen with volunteers who are working 8 hours, 10 hours, got kids at home? They got to get ready for school the next day and whatnot, and then try to put a spiritual guilt trip on them for not coming up to church at the end of a long work day to try to do a little something that night. That makes zero sense at all. So I'm just saying, let's go back to the biblical model. When God set up the sanctuary, he set it up so that there were workers around that place.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. That's right. And speaking of the temple and speaking of facilities, right? JD, you talked about not filling up a building, but fulfilling the mission. I really like that. That should be on the shirt too, by the way. That's awesome. Yeah. But talk to somebody. Talk to somebody right now, real quick, guys. With the time we have left, because somebody's going to go into a building project this year, or maybe next year. They're going to be building a church, or they're going to be looking for a facility. What do they need to be looking for now? Because one of the things that I've seen, and my experience has been, is that we build for us and we build for now, right? We build for our people and for our stuff, and then we build for this moment, and our buildings and facilities don't stand the test of time. If you could just pick one thing that churches kind of need to focus on, a pastor needs to focus on building something in his new facility, what do you think that would be? Is it ATMs in the lobby? You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Whatever. Y'all talk to me. What is it?
Let me jump in first because you have a lot that you can distribute here, Pops. But let me say this. You said one thing, and that's so difficult. So I'm going to kind of go approach it a different way. I think we need to shift our truncated view of our members. The idea that they just want to come sit down and hear a sermon and then their lives are going to be better. No, we need to start viewing ministry through a holistic lens. So we start seeing our members as people and not numbers. People who are dealing with depression, who maybe need some mental health emphasis days where we talk about how you can deal with the mental health issues of your experience. The holistic view perspective is what I think we need to take here. And of course, when you look through that lens, the options are there's a multiplicity of different areas where you can focus your ministry as it relates to what I can do. I know, Dr. Doggett, I don't know if you're going to talk about it, but in his context in particular, his building has, I call them sanctuaries, although they aren't, for the gathering of people. They're sanctuaries for volleyball, sanctuaries for this and that. The idea is that they're meeting the needs of the community in which they've been placed, divinely placed. And that's what I think needs to be done. Shift the perspective to seeing people as holistic in nature and not, truncating them to where they just need to hear a sermon. There's way more ministry to be had than that.
I received that. Dr. Doggett?
Yeah, I know we're running out of time, man. We've gone over the length of time we were supposed to, but I will tell you that the concept for me is our buildings need to be like the well where Jesus met the woman. Yeah. He met the woman where she was living life. He never would have gotten her to come to his church. She was a Samaritan. He was a Jew. And so he had to go where she was living life. Everybody needs water. Everybody engages in certain types of activity. And if you find yourself, if you position your church in that place, right on Main Street, the center of Main Street, where people are just living life, where the traffic is flowing, then you'll have the opportunity to impress them and impact them with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So we have an athletic center that also has an education component to it. There's a medical component to it. There's karate, there's gymnastics, there's basketball, there's volleyball, there's softball, there's a cafe. People come there to live life. I don't have to beg them to come. They're coming to do what they do. I just need to meet them at the well now, and in a low pressure way, low pressure sales, I can introduce them to Jesus through the way we conduct our business there. I can catch them over at the vending machine, and I can start a conversation that can lead to an eternal life conversation. And that's what we've got to think about with our buildings. Where are people going? What are they doing? If they're not living life in your place, they're only coming for a service, we're doomed, because many folks aren't coming to a service again. Gen Z, only, 41% of Gen Z says they want to have any physical worship kind of a setting, period. They get it online. 71% of old folks, baby boomers say, yeah, I need to go to a service. But the bulk of society isn't going to get it that way. So our churches have to be places people are coming to live life. And it needs to happen 7 days a week, not just on Sabbath and Wednesday night. That makes no sense. So we got to rethink our buildings. We got to rethink our mission. And we're going to have to break out of our boxes and do ministry like God has placed it in our hearts to do. To every young person, and this is Young Folks Camp meeting, I want to say, please, what God has placed on your heart, do something about it. Don't die with that dream unborn. Don't do it. Don't let it happen. Don't let it happen. God gave it to you for a reason, and it may have never been done that way before. So what? There are new chapters to write before the return of our Lord, and you've got a pen. God's given you what to write. Start writing. Don't wait for it to be approved and voted. Start writing. Let's get on with it. Times will never be what they were before. Things have changed, and praise God they have. We are less institutional than we've ever been. So now we can be more biblical than we've ever been. And we can go ahead and get the mission done. At the end of the day, I end with this statement. At the end of the day, these churches as we know them are going to be shut down. If it was crucial that we do what we did, they would not have been shut down. In fact, God would not have allowed this season of COVID. But he's given us a taste of what real ministry looks like, when you've got to dig and you've got to get creative and you got to find ways, instead of going to a church and being sedated and made to feel real good and your pains go away because the singing sounds good, etc. Times have changed. What God's placed in you, act on it. Don't wait for it to be voted. Don't talk about what's not happening. Make it happen right now. In the beginning, God created. So every young person who's listening, time for you to start creating.
That's right.
That's my final word, bro.
No, that's good, Doc. That's good. You segue right into the last category, and you said your piece. That was going to be my last question. It was regarding ministry. But what would you say to some young adults who are contemplating not coming back, unsure of the church? I think you said it well. But to JD, the resident young adult here and the creator of the Quarantine Revival, just give us the last statement on this interview right here. What would you say to your peers right now who are just like, yo, I don't really need to be in the building. I may not even need to attend church. I don't want to be involved. Forget that, forget this. What are you saying to them right now?
I'm saying that we need more people like you who think differently, and that this
Mm,
spiritual entrepreneurship, the idea that the Bible refers to it as apostleship, we need people who are leaders who will find tomorrow's solutions when most people can only see today's problems. So, in other
mm,
words, don't be just focused on what you're irritated about. I'll say this: not everyone is irritated about what you're irritated about. Your
mm,
frustration might be an indication of your ministry. So
mm,
what you got to do, and
mm.
I'm encouraging you to do this. I want you to sit down, put your thoughts out on paper, and Dr. Doggy just said it. Don't wait. Go. Again, you're asking God for guidance, but He can't steer a parked car. You got to get moving, and He'll lead you as you're moving in the direction of your divine destiny. But God definitely has a reason for which He created you. And I think that right now you are here for a reason at this specific time in salvation history, and you have something to give. So be okay with the criticism. A lot of the stuff that is new will be criticized, but please know that those who criticize you today will be sitting under your tutelage tomorrow because you were
Wow.
willing to go out there and boldly do something about what you see. And remember, don't miss, I get it. You don't want to go back to things how they used to be. That's okay. But don't miss the idea of mission. Mission. The mission is to share the love of Jesus Christ with the world. So find ways to do that. And listen, you're going to be just fine. We're going to come out of this stronger than when we went into it. And I'm excited to hear the testimonies of this conference and all of you young adults who are about to do something about what you see.
Yes,
There you
sir.
have it, guys. Yo, the theme is clear. We're not next. We're right now. Thank you to the prophets who have outlined for us what could possibly come in the future and maybe some good advice on changes to our facilities, culture, and ministry. Dr. Doggett, JD, thank you guys so much for being here with us. I know our young adults appreciate it. And all of you who are watching, just stay tuned. We're going to talk about this with our panel coming up right now. God bless.